2016. aasta kirjandusfestival HeadRead tõi Tallinnasse Inglise teadusulme kirjaniku Dave Hutchinsoni. Hutchinsoni läbimurdeteos on 2013. aastal ilmunud romaan Euroopa sügis, mis on esimene osa 4 raamatust koosnevast sarjast. Järgnevas saates tutvume Dave Hutchinsoniga, räägime temaga elust ja kirjandusest, näeme teda kohtumas lugejatega ja vestlemas kirjanik Jan Kausiga. When you were very young, you started to write, yes. And then you stopped and you went to journalism and started to write non-fiction as a journalist. In what were you interested while you were a journalist?
Oh, I was writing everything. There were too few of us on the paper to actually specialise. I've written journalism about everything apart from sport, I think. So I did crime, I did politics, lifestyle pieces, soap operas, interviewed actors, absolutely everything.
During that time, the real life started to be dull.
Oh no, it was never dull. It was always interesting. I interviewed the Dalai Lama. That's not dull. No, I didn't write fiction for a long time because I was so busy, and I just ran out of ideas. And I think it helped not writing anything because the ideas started to come back, and I started writing again. And here I am today.
Now you don't write any non-fiction anymore?
No, I don't. I was made redundant, as we say in England, about 6 years ago. The newspaper had a cost-cutting exercise, and we all left. So I'm actually unemployed at the moment.
Unemployed writer.
Unemployed writer, exactly. I would love to have a day job. I need a proper wage. You know, I need a day job, but it gives me time to write. I was writing before the year 2000, but I wasn't publishing very much. I published stories with an American website called Sci Fiction, which is gone now, unfortunately, but which paid very, very well. I gradually started to publish more and more in England in small press publications. And then I wrote Europe in Autumn, and it seems like I've been gone away a long time, but I was kind of doing it in a very low key.
Eesti keelde tõlgitud Euroopa sügis on meie jaoks veel eriti intrigeeriv, kuna peategelaseks on eestlane Rudi. Rudi on ühes Krakowi restoranis peakokk. Üsna ootamatult saab temast müstilise salateenistuse agent. Lisaks sellele, et Rudi on eestlane, toimub osa romaani tegevusest Eestis. Lagunevas ja separatistlikus Euroopas seiklev Rudi tuleb Lahemaale, külla oma vennale ja isale. Tema ekstsentriline isa on just sel hetkel kavandamas Lahemaa kuulutamist iseseisvaks riigiks.
I started writing Europe in Autumn, I think at the end of the 1990s. At least those are the oldest files I've been able to find. And Rudi was already called Rudi, and he was already described as an Estonian. And I cannot for the life of me remember, this is 16, 17 years ago. I'm assuming that I saw something in the news about Estonia that sparked it off, or I read something about Estonia. I apologise to everybody for not being able to give a better answer, but I just can't remember.
About this main character's name, where did you find this name?
I don't know. He was just always Rudi. And I was actually surprised to find out it is actually an Estonian name. I only found this out when the book was being translated. But it actually has 2 U's. So I've been making a little joke about people not being able to pronounce his name properly and just using the 1 U. Yes. But no, he was always going to be Rudi, but I don't know where it came from. I knew that Estonian is perhaps not the easiest language for other Europeans to pronounce. So I wanted to make a little joke about that. I didn't think that people would notice it so much, but you can never tell when you write something. There are 3 Europe novels at the moment. 2 of them have parts taking place in Estonia, and this is the first time I've actually heard anybody speaking Estonian. I'm very grateful to the festival for inviting me, giving me the chance to see some of the locations from the book.
For example, Lahemaa.
Lahemaa, yes, which we went to today, which is brilliant. It's absolutely smashing. I've already picked up enough material to start the 4th book, so it's been a very worthwhile trip, and I'm really enjoying myself.
You haven't been in Estonia before, but in all these Central European countries that you like so much to talk about, have you travelled there?
I've been to Poland a lot. My wife is Polish, so I visited there quite a lot, and I have a great affection for the Polish people and parts of Poland, even though they drive me mad sometimes. I've had some short stories translated into Polish many, many years ago. I would love for European Autumn to be translated. A lot of the action takes place in Poland, so it would be right, I think. People have talked to me about it, but nobody's actually got round to doing it yet. I've visited Berlin on the train. I've never actually visited there properly. And everything else is just internet research and imagination, I would say. The internet is a wonderful thing. When I first started writing the book, there was a Google, but there was no such thing as Google Maps and Google Street View. So I did a lot of my research by buying rough guides and Lonely Planet guides and going to the library and looking at atlases and encyclopedias. So there are little details that you can't get from books. The little details that make all the difference. And the internet is great for that. You can look at photographs, you look at, is it TripAdvisor and things like that. People who've actually been to places and they say, oh, we went to this restaurant, we went to that restaurant. And that's basically how I did it. I did it all over on the internet. It's not a substitute for actually being there because you can't hear the words, you can't hear the language, you can't hear the noise, smell the smells. There are some streets you can't go down on Street View. I wanted to write about Europe, and I didn't want to just stay in one place. I didn't want it just to be in Krakow or in Tallinn or Berlin even. So I wanted him to travel, I wanted him to see stuff, I wanted him to see different cultures, different peoples. Food is very important to Rudy, so he eats a lot. People don't eat enough in science fiction, I've noticed. So I tried to do something about that.
Your books, they are science fiction books, but at the same time like spy stories. Yeah. But in England, spy stories, they are very popular, starting with Bond stories and so on. Are you a fan of spy stories as well?
I am, yes. I didn't read the Bond novels until quite late. I read them all back to back because I thought I should, and didn't really enjoy them, I'm afraid. They weren't what I expected from the films. I enjoy writers like Len Deighton, John le Carré, obviously, who's the master of spy fiction, or espionage fiction, I should say. Yes, I really do enjoy that kind of writing. There's a novel by an English author called Keith Roberts, which is titled Pavane. It's a very, very beautifully written book. Keith Roberts at the height of his powers. And it had a very profound effect on me because up till then I'd read only sort of American science fiction and space opera. And I didn't realise that English people could write science fiction and write about English people and engage with English landscape. And it completely changed the way I wrote. Roberts wrote about extraordinary things happening to ordinary people, people who ran provincial cinemas or petrol stations. In general terms, the biggest stylistic impact I had was people like Len Deighton, Raymond Chandler, beautiful narration of their characters, and that had a big effect on me as well.
from espionage fiction, you go to the science fiction. Why? Does it give a wider range of fantasy, or why have you chosen to write this kind of...
I am actually a science fiction writer. I'm not an espionage writer. I've tried to write straight thrillers and espionage, and I get bored because there is no science fiction in them at all. So I put science fiction in, and then I wind up writing a science fiction novel. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, Europe in Autumn was always going to be a science fiction novel. It's set 50 or 60 years in the future. It's set in a Europe which has changed completely. So that is a science fiction thing. But I wanted to put in elements of spy fiction which people would recognise, because I enjoy that kind of thing. It's entertaining, and I wanted to entertain the reader.
Why did you choose Prague as a gateway?
It's literally just the connection with Kafka. No, I think you're the first person to spot that, actually. It is not the only gateway into the community. Mm-hmm. It seemed like a rational place to put it for that episode. The episode there is called the 13 Cases of Major Zaman, which was a Czech television series about an intelligence officer who went around capturing spies. This is from the 70s or the 80s, I think. And it was basically a propaganda program about how great the government was and how Western spies were trying to bring it down and everything. And I read an article about it in The Guardian years and years and years ago. And I cut it out because I was interested, and I kept it just in case I would need it again. And the name, the title of the show was The 13 Cases of Major Zaman. And it just popped into my head when I was writing the book. And this is why it's set in Prague, but the connection with Kafka was always there. There was a thing called the Deutsch hypothesis, which states that as the universe grows older, every particle in it will either go that way or that way. And every time it goes that way, the universe splits into a different probability. Every time it goes that way, it splits. So you have this infinite branching of universes where they're all virtually identical apart from that one particle went that way. But if you go far enough down the line, these universes are actually fundamentally different to our own. And I find the possibility in that fascinating. That's a huge playground to go and run about in. It's very extreme physics, and it's probably not provable, although there are people who are working to prove it, theoretically, and I'd be fascinated if they actually do. I've had a lot of people say to me, is the Europe of Europe in Autumn, is it an alternate universe? And it's not, it wasn't meant to be. But if somebody comes up to me and says, oh, you made a mistake here, I can say to them, well, yeah, it's an alternative universe, it's not quite the same over there. So there was a bit of a get out for me.
You are writing about parallel worlds, and do you believe in this kind of philosophy, or you're just imagining that it could?
I'm just imagining it, really. I would like to believe in parallel universes because that would make the universe really interesting. It's like believing in alien worlds and alien life. I suspect that there is no more intelligent life in the galaxy, but there may be other life. Plant life, animal life. But really, how interesting would it be if there was another intelligent species out there somewhere? So I think it would be really interesting in the universe if there were parallel universes. We probably wouldn't be able to visit them, and we may not be able to prove they exist, but it would make things really interesting.
You already mentioned that we will meet Rudy again.
Yes.
Somewhere else, possibly in a new book then, yeah?
He's in the next book, Europe at Midnight, but he's only in it really for a couple of pages. He's in Europe in winter a lot. Basically, the book is about him trying to discover something and actually discovering something even worse by accident. and he winds up having to try and stop a war. He has no resources. All he can basically do is say, please don't start a war. But that's Rudy. He's always fighting with no weapons. But he never stops. He never gives up, because it's the right thing to do. If the fourth book ever does get written, he will be in the fourth book a bit, but not a lot. He'll certainly be in it at the end, because I want to finish the whole quartet of books with Rudy. But yes, he's been a very popular character. I don't know why. Everybody likes him. People say, can we have more Rudy? Oh, no, not another book. Stop me writing these things. There are possibly going to be 2 short stories as well. I've been asked to do a short story for an anthology for the European Science Fiction Convention, which is in Barcelona. And I've got an idea for a story about, which I couldn't fit into any of the books, with Rudy actually out on a mission sometime earlier in his career. I wanted to do a thing called the Kura Cookbook, which is basically, it'll be a novella about Rudy doing something, and it's going to be interspersed with recipes from all the places he goes to. And I wanted to publish that as an e-book, just as a bit of extra for people who like the novels. Actually, he's a very competent cook. He's very appreciative of other people's cooking. And the other people who are telling him he's terrible are just plain wrong. They just have no idea. You can't live in England at the moment without being interested in politics. Whether you're pro or anti, it just makes people angry. No, you have to be political in England at the moment. I'm a big fan of the Schengen zone, the borderless, frontierless Europe. I think it's an extremely civilised idea, and I'm fearful that it might it might only be a passing fad, I'm afraid. The central character goes home and visits his family and discovers that his father wants to make Lahima a country all of its own. And it's basically Rudy goes home and it becomes his worst nightmare. But I wanted to, I talked in general terms in the book about people setting up their own countries, and I wanted to give an example of how that could be done. So I wanted to use that as an example of how somebody might do it. I'm in favour of Schengen. I remember years ago travelling from Poland to London on a coach, and we sat for 5 hours waiting to cross the German border. Hour after hour after hour, the line of coaches and trucks went for miles and miles back from the border. And now you can just sort of, you don't stop, you can drive from, I don't know, from Portugal to Ukraine probably without having to stop at a border post. And I think that's just a very, very civilised way to live, and I'm afraid that one day soon that might go away. I have issues with the way the EU works. I think they've behaved disgracefully towards Greece recently. They've been very, very slow to come up with any response to the refugee crisis. But the European or the EU ideal, I'm very much in favour of. I would probably get in trouble saying that in England. I'll get people throwing things at me at the moment. I've always been a very keen European.
Europe in your novel is filled with anxiety, uncertainty, and even violence. I think I can say best example of this is a city-state with 4 houses and with a civil war going on. So in your opinion, what are the biggest threats Europe is facing at the moment?
Political disunity, social unrest. I think Europe at the moment is in a state of flux. It's responding to the diaspora from the Middle East and from Africa. I'm quite hopeful of how I'm generally quite an optimistic person about these things. Europe will survive, it will change, it will evolve.
We can manage the diaspora from Middle East, you think?
Yeah, I think so. It needs a social and political will. It needs people to be kind and civilized about this, that people need help. You know, it is the right thing to do to help people who are in distress, not put them in camps and then send them back to where they came from. I'm utterly horrified every day when I see something new and think, well, that's from the book. And seriously, I dread putting the news on some days. When Russia invaded Crimea, I thought to myself, these people they're regarding the book as a how-to manual rather than a novel. It really is very strange. When it came out, that year we had the issue of the Scottish referendum to leave the United Kingdom, and also the invasion of Crimea. And people came up to me and said, you know, you're really lucky it came out this year because it's really relevant. And I said, well, no, I'm not lucky. People are getting hurt thousands of miles away. This is not luck. This is an awful coincidence. It wasn't planned to be a social commentary. It was kind of a projection of what I think Europe could become. And now we're seeing frontiers going back up again. We're seeing the borders along the southern edge of the EU being hardened. We're seeing the Schengen rights being rescinded between Austria and Hungary, I think, temporarily, allegedly, but it could become permanent. But the thing is that border wire is very Moorish. You see your neighbour putting a border up, and you think, oh, I would like one of those as well, with my neighbour next door on the other side. And it's a kind of domino effect where everybody starts putting borders up. Austria rescinding the Schengen agreement. That hadn't happened before, as far as I know. But other countries think, well, if they can do it, so can we. And we come back to the current debate in Britain about leaving the EU. That's not been done before. There was a provision in the Treaty of Lisbon. There's a mechanism by which a country can leave the EU. And they never expected it to be used, probably, but it had to be there for legal reasons, I expect. I do wonder if Britain leaving the EU will catalyse other countries to leave as well. Some of it is meant to be satire. In the book, Scotland does become independent eventually, but they're so poor that they have to be bankrolled by China to be able to afford to survive. And I put that in literally as a satirical point about Chinese control over the world at the moment. I thought that was really quite funny. And then I discovered that Manchester airport is being rebuilt with Chinese money. So maybe it's not quite as far out as I thought. You know, the real world is often a lot weirder than we expect. Well, I'm a really close friend of irony. I like putting gags into books and into stories. Life is often utterly ridiculous and farcical. You can't take that out of a story. There is a vast amount of ridiculousness in life, if only if you look for it. And it makes the books interesting, rather than just being flat and po-faced and, you know, like stone. It makes them a bit more pliable.
Do you start from one point and you know where you will finish, or you can change in the meanwhile?
I didn't know how European Autumn would finish. In fact, I worked and worked and worked to find a better ending for it. I'm not really very pleased with the ending, and I worked for ages to think of something better, and it's the best thing I can think of. So I didn't have the ending for that. I had the beginning and the end of the third book in the series, but nothing in the middle. And so I had to fill that in. And I have the beginning and the end of possibly the fourth book. But things can change, you know, things get thrown away, things get used, things get recycled. It's a very organic process. It's not like I have a plan. I have to tell the publishers what I plan to do, but they're quite realistic in thinking, well, once he starts writing it, things will change. I find writing very difficult. It's very hard work. And it's not just the concentration. I have a very short attention span, and my mind wanders a lot. But I find the actual physical act of writing very difficult. I would rather do anything else than write. That's why it took me 13 years to write the book. However, the sequel to it took me 6 weeks to write, because I was terrified that the publishers would lose interest, and I really wanted to write another one. And when they said yes, they said, okay, don't tell anybody, this is just in this room, this just has to stay in this room, but we signed the contract for Europe at midnight. And the publishers asked me, when can you, this was a couple of years ago, in May, the middle of May. And they said, when can you have it finished for? And I said, oh, I can probably get it finished by the end of July. So they sent me the contracts, and I didn't actually read the contract. I looked at how much they were going to pay me, and I put it away. And I wrote the book 10 weeks. I nearly went into hospital with this thing. And I sent the manuscript away, and the editor was away at a book fair. And he came back a week or two later, and I got an email saying, that's really great, Dave, thanks for the book, a whole year early. Because they thought I'd meant the end of July the following year. They thought I was going to take a year to write it, and I'd meant, no, I will do this year, I'll finish it. So, but the good thing was, because of that, we had an entire year to edit and mess around with it and change things. So, and it was a much better book for that than if I'd just sort of spent the entire year writing it and then a week editing it. So Europe in Autumn took a long time to write, so it was edited over and over and over again down the years. The final section took me, I won't tell you how quickly I wrote it was ridiculous, because I didn't want the publishers to change their minds. But I'm a terribly idle writer. I would rather do anything at all than write. Any writer who tells you it's easy is really not telling you the truth. I find it very, very difficult.
Kõik tööd on rasked, ei tule ka looming ilma töö ja pingutuseta. Kuid loomingut nautida on mõnus. Seega soovime teile head lugemist ja muid toredaid kultuurielamusi.